So have you noticed something strange happening lately? Like in conversations that people are talking a whole lot more, but the understanding is much less than it used to be? Like families are dividing over their political views, and sincere friendships are ending because of disagreements of how people see things. In communities, they feel like they're standing on opposite ends of a line. And yet everyone involved believes that they're defending what's right. Why is that? So here's the real question. Why does being more certain about our beliefs often make conversations less productive? And I'm not saying don't have beliefs, but that certainty, what's happening there? So hold that thought, because by the end of this conversation, you'll see why judgment quietly shuts down our influence and our connection, and why the skill of non-judgment, and it's not what you think it is, but why the skill of non-judgment is far more powerful than most people ever realize. Hi, I'm Leezá Steinorf. I'm an international leadership coach, a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, and my work focuses on helping people and organizations to navigate communication and conflict with more ease and more clarity. And if conversations like this help you to understand human behavior better or to find more clarity, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Okay, so let's talk about why judgment feels so satisfying. It's because human beings are meaning-making creatures. Like, we create meaning out of what we experience. When we observe behavior, our minds quickly go to the questions of, is this good or is this bad? Is it right or wrong? Is it safe or dangerous? And that third one, is it safe or dangerous, that actually comes from our nervous system of scoping the landscape and making sure we're safe. But those quick interpretations, they help us navigate the world, and they also create a shortcut. But the moment that we judge someone's character or their motives, our curiosity shuts down. We lock in to that initial question and answer. We stop asking more questions. We stop listening. And we actually start defending our interpretation of what is being observed, rather than being curious about what's actually out there. And is our interpretation aligned with what's really going on? So here's the main part that many people miss. Judgment doesn't just change how you see the other person. It literally changes how the other person hears you. Okay? So imagine a conversation between two friends, and they may have very different political views. And I can speak to this because I grew up in a family with very different political views, okay? So one person says something they believe strongly in, and the other person immediately responds, that's ridiculous. Now the conversation is shifted, right? The first person is no longer discussing the issue. They're defending themselves. And once people feel judged, something super predictable happens. Their nervous system moves into protection. Makes sense, right? They defend their position even harder. So even if parts of that position might actually be kind of flexible, they lock in. And this is why arguments often make our beliefs stronger instead of weaker. And not because people are stubborn, but because judgment actually activates our defenses. It locks us into our position. Okay, so I want to talk about judgment versus discernment, because here's where an important distinction is. Judgment and discernment are not the same thing. So judgment collapses the person, and it puts them together with the behavior. It collapses them together into one blob, if you will. If you believe that, then you must be ignorant. Discernment, on the other hand, separates them. I strongly disagree with your position, and I want to understand how you arrived there, right? So you're distinguishing the person having that opinion from the opinion and how they arrived there. So discernment allows evaluation without dehumanizing someone, without destroying them as a human. And that difference changes the entire course of a conversation. The whole tone and feel of it is different. And once you can see this distinction clearly, something really interesting happens. You realize that non-judgment doesn't weaken your position. it actually strengthens your ability to influence and to engage. And I want to speak to non-judgment doesn't mean that you just don't have an opinion and everything is okay and whatever happens. That is not what I'm talking about. It's a very strong and very aware stance. So, just take an example. Think about the last time that someone really listened to you. Like they weren't waiting for their turn to speak. Like they were really, really present and not about to bring a rebuttal, okay? Present to you. Chances are that you felt more open and more willing to hear what they were saying because their reception of you invited your openness. You sensed the environment as a place where ideas could be exchanged. That's because curiosity actually lowers our defensiveness. And when defensiveness lowers, our learning becomes possible again. We can connect, we can share ideas. And this does not mean that you agree with the other person. You don't have to agree with the other person. But it simply means that conversation remains human and it remains respectful. So there's a point that happens in many conversations when someone says something that's controversial and then the room gets really quiet. And you can feel that tension, right? Just like, oh gosh, here we go. You're familiar with that. And some people, they lean forward into that challenge. Like that's where they thrive. It's like, all right, here we go. This is going to be great. And other people lean back. They avoid conflict. They don't feel comfortable in that environment. And neither one of those is really super useful because it's the same dynamic of butting heads, of opposition, of conflict and impact. But occasionally, you will find someone who asks a simple question. Can you say more about that? Whew. And that curiosity, that invitation, that question does something so powerful. It not only invites them to answer, it keeps your curiosity and the curiosity of other people alive. It's like it breathes life into the conversation. So once curiosity is there, the conversation can continue without collapsing into attack and defensiveness toward one another. It keeps things flowing. And I'm going to say it again, it doesn't mean you have to agree, but you can continue a conversation. And if you actually are interested in having your opinion be heard or making a change or standing for something, your highest chance in doing that is being heard. And your highest chance of being heard is keeping that curiosity and keeping your own hearing open. So here's the surprising part. The person who remains curious is often the person who becomes most influential in the conversation because you're holding that ground of openness, of curiosity, and bringing the conversation forward. And that's human dynamic. It's incredibly powerful. So why is polarization growing? It's because a lot of our discourse, especially today, rewards certainty. The strongest opinions get the most attention, the biggest headlines, the loudest voices are dominating the conversation. But that certainty, that absoluteness, often replaces understanding. And I want to again distinguish certainty from standing in your beliefs. One can stand very strongly in what they believe, stand for their values, advocating for what they feel is humane and caring for people and socially responsible, without locking into something that creates a certainty and a wall that others can't permeate. And then there's a gridlock. So when people feel unheard, which is what certainty engenders, they move further into their positions. And not because they're incapable of moving or of nuance, but it's because when they feel certainty coming at them, they feel a need to defend their whole stance, their identity, who they are, their value system, everything. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Do not enter into a discourse unless you can argue for every perspective present." That's powerful. And look at what he accomplished, right? On an entire continent for literally millions of people. So that leads us to a really kind of quiet paradox, if you will. The more aggressively, I'm going to say, we are in trying to prove that we're right, the less influence we actually have. So I speak to this often not only for personal relationships, for families, but for leadership. Non-judgment is such a powerful leadership skill, and it does not mean neutrality, as I said earlier. It means that you stay curious long enough to understand that full picture before you react. Coming back to Gandhi, right? In leadership environments, it's incredibly valuable because people will share more information when they feel respected, when they feel that their perspective has validity in the room. And the more information leads to better decisions, right? So a leader who listens deeply before they respond often sees dynamics that other people miss. And here's the interesting thing. I think that most people get, I'm going to say even terrified of in today's world is what I'm seeing. If I give somebody else whom I disagree with, whose views or actions I completely disagree with, if I give them any airtime to share their opinions, then either I'm threatened or I'm agreeing with what they're saying or I'm handing them more power. It's actually the opposite. When I give somebody the opportunity to share what they're thinking and how they're seeing things, first of all, I have so much more information about how they see the world. That gives me more ability to interact with them. Secondly, when people feel heard and understood, their nervous system settles. They stop being defensive, and then they are able literally to come into their frontal lobe and listen. If they're defensive, they can't listen. Physiologically, they're in defense mechanism. They're in fight or flight. They're not going to hear a word you say. And lastly, especially as a leader, if I have all of the information or as much as I can get from other people, then I can see the landscape. Then I can bring ideas and arguments and suggestions that don't ignore this other person's stance, but actually include them in a way that the suggestion or the resolution will feel more amenable to them, and I get to stand stronger in my belief system or in what I'm advocating for. Because I have addressed what it is that they're standing for. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I've not dismissed it. And that brings you so much farther along the road. And I've heard recently people that argued with this stance is, well, then you're just going to allow people to do whatever they want and to cause harm. Not at all. If you look at some of the greatest negotiators, some of the greatest peacemakers in our history, in the history of the world, this is how they've proceeded. They have listened first to the other person before they've attempted to create any kind of resolution. So, when we're looking at the bigger picture, when we strengthen the muscle of non-judgment, when we move away from the gridlock of certainty and own our values, own our beliefs, and yet stay curious about how is somebody else seeing this that is so different from the way I'm seeing it. We don't give up ourselves, but that curiosity opens the stage for somebody else to talk, and that gives us incredible influence in the conversation and moving forward. So the ability matters beyond politics or cultural debates. This affects our families. It affects our relationships, our friendships, and also our workplaces. Any environment where people bring different perspectives to the table. When judgments dominate, when that certainty is rock hard, then conversations get super narrow, if they happen at all. And when you can remain curious without leaving your own value system, you remain present. And then conversations are enabled and they can even expand. And that expansion creates much more possibility for real understanding and for moving forward together. So, the next time you hear an idea that you strongly disagree with, I'm going to invite you to take a pause. I speak about POP. Pause, observe, proceed. P-O-P. Pause for a moment before you label it and ask yourself a super simple question. What might I be missing about how this person got here? Like, Do I really know everything that has been involved in bringing them to this place? And you may still disagree strongly, but the conversation will remain humane if you're curious about how they arrived there. And that's often where meaningful influence begins. As I say, beyond that noise is you, as you are. So if you found this conversation useful, subscribe to the channel, like the video so other people can find it too. This is a series called Staying Human in a Reactive World, where we're exploring quiet skills that help people stay grounded and thoughtful and clear, even when emotions run high. And in the next episode, we're going to look at something closely related, and that is, why do groups often pretend that uncomfortable moments never even happened? And how one person who remains steady can actually shift that entire environment. I'm really glad you've been here for the conversation. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for listening.